Now on Money Talk 1010 AM, it's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there will probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Okay, why is Morgan Streetman huffing and puffing? Is it because he's all excited about the Robert Mueller investigation? It's finally come to a close. Is it because he had a busy day and he's probably stuck in traffic or juggling between the courthouse and here? Or is it something else that we don't know about? You're so wound up about the Out There segment, maybe.
I'm about to blow your house down. That's what's going on here.
That's what it is. Okay.
It's all the above.
Boy, I tell you what, that's hot right there, Wet. I just came in because I've been on I-4 for about the last 2.5 hours.
Oh, it's so bad right now.
I was talking about it.
So bad.
Did you hear me talking about it?
Yeah, I heard you talking about it.
Was it right?
I was in it.
Okay.
I was in it.
What's going on over there? Is there special? Is it just
It's just
snowbirds?
spring break and everybody is going somewhere. Do you look at downtown Clearwater now? Mm-hmm. Ooh, you wouldn't even want to attempt to head toward the beach right now.
It was bumper to bumper on Saturday. We were trying to make it on time to the Disney on Ice show, and it was awful. Same thing westbound, so it wasn't even a work day at all.
Yeah.
Everybody was out and having fun because it was such a pretty day.
Mm-hmm. Hey, did you notice something? I took a picture of this. When I was out on Saturday, I've never seen this before, and I'm going to show Morgan right now on my app where it shows you the temperature.
Uh-huh.
Look at this. Have you ever seen that come up on your phone?
What's that? Unhealthy air quality?
Unhealthy air quality for sensitive groups.
Huh, no, I've never seen that.
That popped up, and then I looked at it. It was unhealthy air quality for sensitive groups in Tampa, Clearwater, St. Pete, and this is on your little app where you have your temperature and what the whole day is going to look like, and on your weather app. And it also said that it was unhealthy all the way across Orlando. So I'm like, what's going on in this band?
Was it all green? Was the band all green? Because it'd be pollen.
Maybe it is pollen, but would that make it unhealthy for sensitive groups? I guess so. Or I thought they were talking more about pollution.
Yeah. Boy, I tell you, I've felt the unhealthiness.
Me too.
I'm sensitive to the pollen. It's been just. So
Me
you
too.
ought to see my car. It's nice yellow silver.
Green,
yeah.
right?
I know.
I should have taken it and gotten it washed, but then I'm like, well, I'm going to be driving across the state, so don't bother.
Oh, my
But yeah,
goodness.
don't touch it because you'll get it on you. I got a little bit on my arm this morning, right before I went into court.
Yeah.
Ugh. Anyway, I'll be looking forward to that being over with.
I know. When
Speaking
does that,
of being
when does that
over
end?
with,
Yeah, speaking of being over with, something
important is
done.
over with. Tell you what, I'm excited today. You knew I'd be excited, didn't you, Pat George?
Yeah, I just have 3 words.
Surprise, surprise, surprise.
Oh, well, we are going to spend most of the show talking about that today. But before we do that, just in keeping with our traditions, I thought we'd go ahead and hit our quick look back segment.
All right.
And our local interest segment, and then we'll get into talking about the Mueller report, which is obviously the big news of the day. But in terms of our quick look back, you'll probably miss this in the shuffle right now because the most important thing going on is Bob Mueller and his report and all the reporting that's going on about that. And so you could be forgiven for missing the fact that our friends, and we've talked about them before, over at the Southern Poverty Law Center. You remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Southern Poverty Law Center? They're the ones that are like the official group that designates the hate groups for Facebook and Google and everything else. Well, of course, we've told you about these folks and what they're really all about. We've told you that before. But if you check into the news right now, that organization right now, this past couple of weeks, is literally imploding. They've gotten rid of their primary founder, which is Morris Dees, for sexual harassment, by the way, for all you Me Too people out there. Yeah, it's funny how you could be a civil rights attorney and yet be sexually harassing people that you worked with. But apparently that's what's going on. It's been alleged. And obviously Southern Poverty Law Center must have thought there was something to it because they got rid of him. Well, not but about a week later, the gentleman that's essentially the co-founder, Richard Cohen, who's always been one of the executives, as well as their legal counsel, Rhonda Brownstein, they're both out with suggestions of, maybe that they weren't quite completely above board around the SPLC. And what's come out is a lot of the staffers that work there have talked about their experiences. In fact, there's a very interesting article. I think it's in the New Yorker, and it includes some stuff. Certainly, if you're a donor to the Southern Poverty Law Center, you're probably a member of a class who could sue them for fraud and other things because, they've taken all these donations, but apparently they barely spend any money on the actual things that they're taking the donations for.
Right.
Yeah.
What do they spend money on?
Well,
their salaries.
Yeah, salaries. Apparently, they do a lot of socializing, including around Montgomery, Alabama, where the organization's located.
Well, Southern Poverty just sounds like a soiree. It sounds like a
Oh, doesn't it sound like fun? I mean, they're eating at only the finest restaurants when you work for the Southern Poverty Law Center. But we brought you a story, I guess, going back about a year now, where they'd actually shipped a bunch of their money offshore, if you remember, like over to the Cayman Islands. They've been depositing all their money offshore. And we suggested, wonder why they're doing that. Might be something coming down the pike. Now, I don't know if it was the stuff that's just come down the pike. But, of course, if you're in that organization for 30, 40 years, you know what's going on. You know if you got trouble with the founder and he's sexually harassing the employees. It's like Bill Clinton. You send your daughter to be an intern at the Clinton Presidential Library in Little Rock, Arkansas. What do you think's going to happen? Seriously. I mean, is anybody surprised? Some people know about this, I'm sure. And, the organization may have been taking steps to try to insulate some of its assets from what I'm sure are going to be a ton of lawsuits coming now.
Where was this headquartered?
Well, Montgomery, Alabama.
Okay, and were there little divisions all over the country, or was it just there?
Well, it's primarily there, but they travel around to fundraise. So they travel around a good bit, but that's where their home office is. Now, with everything being electronic nowadays, I mean, mostly they had become an online ratings organization. And again, they were singling out groups and calling them hate groups. So, for example, they would take a religious group, maybe who didn't believe that homosexuality was okay, let's just say, and maybe the religious group even went so far to say, but we don't necessarily want any laws in place, because this is a true story. These happen quite a bit. And Southern Poverty Law Center was designating those kind of groups as hate groups. And there's been litigation over this because those really aren't hate groups. They have a strongly held religious opinion. And we've had Supreme Court rule on this, by the way, that you can have that as a religious opinion. Now, we're not supporting it, but people are allowed to have their opinions in this country. That's what we are supporting. We're supporting the right of people to have their opinions, even where we disagree with them.
Sure.
You remember that old phrasing we used to say to each other sometimes, which would be, I may not agree with you, but I'll defend your right to the death to say it, whatever it is that you want to say, because that's core to our country is the freedom of expression, even where we don't agree.
Do you ever see that on Twitter?
No.
Hashtag.
Hashtag defend your right to the death.
I don't agree with you, but I defend your right. No, you don't see that.
Somehow I don't think that's coming on Twitter. So anyway, folks, if you're interested in SPLC and some of what they've done, go out there and just do a quick Google search on them. Particularly check out that article that was in the New Yorker, because it really gets into some of the details from the staffers, who the folks that go to work there are true believers. They're very liberal-minded and all that. And frankly, they're quickly disenfranchised, according to the article, once they go to work there. And there's kind of a culture of, now we're going to tell you where you really came to work and give you a certain amount of information that's going to show you that, that this is basically just a big fundraising scam. And that's the actual language that they use, that it's a big fundraising scam. So for all the people out there that support the Southern Poverty Law Center, including some folks we've had on this show, one of whom I talked to this morning over in Melbourne, folks, you need to look into this and you need to figure out what exactly was going on with that group that you were supporting, because I suspect it is not what you thought it was.
No, it doesn't seem to be.
And Roxanne, I know you've got a local interest for us because we want to run into that, and then we're going to jump into the Mueller report with the time we've got left and kind of tear it apart.
Well, excited to announce that Stephen Carell has been selected as USF's 7th president.
All right.
And when I hear that name, I immediately think of Steve Carell.
That's what I'm about to say, the 40-year-old version?
The 40-year-old version, or Michael Scott. He's nothing like Michael Scott. Sounds like he's going to bring even more great culture to USF and our Tampa Bay community in terms of what his ideas are, really focusing on the students and academic, the research institutions, and how about our downtown Tampa Medical School?
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's just about getting that visibility that we would like across the country, and he's focused on all of these things.
So he's replacing, was it Judy Genshaft?
Judy Genshaft, yes. So there were about 33 candidates, and they whittled it down to 4. And when you look at the other 3, I think it was a no-brainer to select him. He really has a lot going on and seems to get the whole concept of what USF's strengths are.
Mm-hmm. Well, got a new logo, new president.
Do you like the new logo? Have you seen it?
It's okay.
I like it.
I think they spent a lot of money for it.
They
I'd
did.
like to get that money. I'll design your next
Close to
logo,
50,000.
USF. New medical school, lots of exciting stuff. The Mueller report when we come back. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Well, today of all days, I mean, what a great day to be on the Morgan Streetman Show, here with you, our listening audience. And if you want to call us and get on the lines and you have some comment to make about the Mueller report, we'd love to have you on. The number to call is 888-404-1010. And as I think you probably know by now, the summary of the Mueller report was released late yesterday by the Attorney General, William Barr, and it essentially concluded the Mueller report, which is now, we're talking about a 2-year investigation. That's just the involvement of Bob Mueller in a special counsel position investigating this. But we really need to add another about year and a half back before that because they've been investigating this since at least July of 2016. And what is it that they've supposedly been investigating, right? Russian collusion, as everybody was calling it on the news. But then you got the coy folks like James Comey, former FBI director, and he's saying, well, collusion is a word that I'm not familiar with, as though he doesn't know regular English words. Okay, conspiracy. That's what they're talking about, conspiracy. And the report came out, and after, I don't know, it was about $35 million that we spent on the Mueller investigation. I mean, can you imagine that? We had to spend 2 years and $35 million to get to the following conclusion. Quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Now, for those of you that follow these stories closely and you've stuck with us over the years, you already know that the Russian election interference activities were extremely minimal. We're talking to the tune of less than $10,000 in total.
In Facebook ads, right?
Yeah, in Facebook ads and money spent in Google, according to executives from both companies in congressional testimony. Believe me, if there was more, they would have testified honestly about it. But there simply was not very much. So those of you that have been paying attention to this and have been paying attention to us, you already know that there effectively was no Russian interference in the election. But for whatever reason, the D.C. swamp won't let this part of the fairy tale go. And that probably goes back to something that we told you, gosh, I don't know, about 3 years ago, which is watch it. Watch, because the United States is going to be fired up into a war posture with Russia. Pat George, you remember when we talked about that on this show?
Time and again.
Time and again, we said, watch this happen. Because at the time, remember, it wasn't the case that Russia was our sworn enemy and certainly the greatest enemy the United States has ever faced. Heck, I remember a debate, where Mitt Romney said that Russia was our greatest enemy. If you remember, Barack Obama was making fun of him. Mm-hmm. He said, ha, 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 the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back. And everybody laughed and all the chattering classes. This is so funny. You're so stupid, Mitt Romney, making stuff up like that. Then give us another, couple of years. And here they are. They're doing the same thing. They're making all this crap up. So they're not letting go of that. Because the truth of the matter is, in general, the military-industrial complex still wants to go to war with Russia. So we're going to find some reason. It's going to be Venezuela. Syria obviously wasn't it. We'll find something, eventually, and we'll wind up in some kind of a war posture with them.
Democrats like to fight.
Boy, the Democrats turned into neocons over the past 2 years. Have you noticed that? This is the party of the pink hats. This is remember the Code Pink protesters back during the George W. Bush years, how anti-war the Democrat Party was, and I can't believe what we did in Iraq, and what never again, never again.
Do you think there will be any segment, because already you hear Maxine Waters saying, this is not over, this is not finished yet. Do you think there's any portion of the Democratic Party that's like, you know what, the reports lays it all out there, let's move on because we've got bigger things to take care of? Or do you think the majority of the Democratic Party is like, no, let's just keep, no matter what party you're aligned with,
right?
Then you agree or disagree with the report and you want the investigation to keep going.
Right. Well, I think Nancy Pelosi, with her statement that she didn't want to pursue impeachment, I think she was kind of giving you a little bit of a preview that, the truth is that they probably would like to just drop it and move on because for their purposes, they've accomplished what they wanted, which is the complete frustration of the Donald Trump presidency. The complete frustration. We're getting ready to get back into an election cycle. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And the whole time, his whole first 2 years of his whole presidency, he's been essentially on the run from this witch hunt. But the report totally clears him. It completely exonerates him. And I'll tell you, go ahead.
Do you agree with this? We're looking. Morgan and I are looking at a headline right now. This is Giuliani from an attorney perspective. Yeah. Is that a fair statement?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's the same thing that William Barr said. You can't obstruct justice if there's no underlying crime, right? Because the obstruction of justice has to be wrongful, which means you have to be trying to cover up some kind of underlying crime. But if there was no Russian collusion, which is what's been concluded, and again, folks, is there any doubt in your mind that if there was even just a shred of evidence of Russian collusion, that we would have heard about it? Because they haven't been able to leak even just one thing over the entire 2-year period, even just one thing that shows Russian collusion. But yeah, I sat around and watched CNN yesterday, and they essentially said, well, it doesn't exonerate him. It doesn't prove there was no collusion. It just says that, it does say that there's no collusion. It says that there's no collusion, and they're trying to make it say something else that it doesn't say. They're trying to suggest that it says, and I read this on a Reuters headline, that the Mueller report finds the president didn't knowingly conspire with Russia. Hello? You cannot unknowingly conspire. That's a completely pointless modifier that they added there as though, maybe the Trump organization unknowingly conspired. No, that's false. And they just won't let this go, will they? They just won't let it go. And now they're hanging it all on the idea, the report doesn't exonerate him for the obstruction of justice charge. But to your point, Roxanne, yes, it does. Because you don't have an obstruction of justice charge unless there was the underlying Russian conspiracy charge. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, He's not
trying to cover anything up.
There's nothing to obstruct. Mm-hmm. There's no justice to be obstructed, right? Mm-hmm. So the one requires the other. So it's really disingenuous. And I think, I think the Mueller investigation, frankly, I don't think has been completely above board. I've now finished Sidney Powell's book, License to Lie, and I have a much better understanding of who the pit bull Andrew Weissman is. And
Who is he?
Well, he's one of the people on Mueller's team. In fact, he's the one who probably wrote the report, they
Interesting.
say. Now, he was also involved with the Enron and Arthur Anderson prosecutions back in the early 2000s,
really? Okay.
All of which have been overturned for prosecutorial misconduct. The Sidney Powell wrote a book called License to Lie. It's number one.
You wouldn't know that because there is no Arthur Anderson anymore.
That's
thanks
right.
To
Thanks to them, they
Right.
destroyed that company, and you actually have some knowledge of that because
Yeah.
you were in that business way back when. So they destroyed that company, but it's the holier than thou prosecutors who don't apparently care about actual justice. In other words, there's this old phrase in the law, and that is the state always wins when justice is done. And that means that the state isn't really out to convict. They're out for justice to be done. So if justice means conviction, then that's what the state wants. But if justice means that the individual charged should be acquitted, then that's what the state wants. See, because the state never loses when justice is done. But there's a whole group of prosecutors who pretend like it's a game. And I guess to them it is a game because they're not on the receiving end of their prosecutorial conduct. And so it's very easy for them to play around with other people's lives and just not take it seriously because it's not directly affecting them. They don't understand what they're putting people through, or they're not taking the time to really understand it. So after learning about all of this prosecutorial misconduct at the Department of Justice over many years and many different investigations and prosecutions, all involving Andrew Weissman and another small cadre of Department of Justice prosecutors who seem to believe that the end justifies the means and they have a win-at-all-cost strategy. But after learning about them, I really have no respect for the team that Bob Mueller put together. Now, folks, we have to remember the things that we learned about the team, like remember the lover boy and lover girl, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and they had all these text messages back and forth. And then remember how once Bob Mueller found out about that, he kicked them off the team right away? You remember all that? Well, you remember the fact that the only reason anybody even found out about that was because there was an ongoing Inspector General's investigation? And because Andrew McCabe had lied, Lisa Page gave him her cell phone. We're going to pick that back up on the other side of this break, folks. Stick with us.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. So, Morgan, while you were busy at work today, Pat George and I were on Twitter and watching some of Savannah Guthrie in her interview with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And boy, she was going after her because she wanted Sarah to explain why President Trump isn't apologizing or hasn't apologized to Mueller, and doesn't he owe him an apology? And it was just strange. I mean, she was interrupting her. You could tell she was definitely, it was going crazy on Twitter.
She was, to say the least, very, very angry at the outcome of this report. And Twitter was not happy with her.
No, which is odd.
Right.
Because I'm surprised that shows you how many people must have been complaining, because usually the only thing that rises to the top on Twitter would be people making fun of Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Right. When I was watching CNN, for a good solid, I wasn't really watching it. I had it on in the background for a good solid 3-4 hours yesterday. And, I had to witness Wolf Blitzer correcting just about every guest that they had, every panelist that they had, because they all wanted to say something along the lines of, well, Bob Mueller didn't actually conclude that there was no Russian conspiracy. And Wolf Blitzer would have to say, no, actually, that's exactly what the letter says. So I know you're in denial about it, folks, but that's exactly what the letter says. And does anyone understand the presumption of innocence? That means unless you're proved guilty, you're innocent. Mm-hmm. You get the presumption of innocence. It's not just, there's a lot of things that were written about in the Mueller report, and generally where there's smoke, there's fire. No, if there was something that they could convict him on, a crime, they would have charged him, and they would be pursuing it, and they came out and said there's nothing. They have
crazy
nothing. After 2 years, zero, nothing. And I just find it amazing that people don't want to accept that. What they're essentially saying, which is what we've already known here for the whole time we've been on this show, and we've been saying, look, there's no collusion here. This is our president, right? This is our president. Now, you would think that it would be good news. Couldn't you rise above partisan politics just a little bit and be be glad that...
Absolutely not. They're not going to do that.
No, they're not happy, are they? Nobody's happy on the Democrat side about the situation. 2 weeks ago, all we heard about was how much everybody trusted Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller would never say anything that was wrong. Well, now he's come out and he said there's no collusion, and they're all like, well, just, we don't know about that. He must have been under some political pressure or, I heard somebody say the other day, well, I haven't seen any reason to question Bob Mueller's integrity.
Well, the funny thing, too, is when you think about Savannah Guthrie asking those questions, well, shouldn't he apologize to him now because Trump made all these terrible comments about Mueller throughout the investigation, and now that he gave him a good review, shouldn't he apologize to him? No, well, that doesn't make any sense. There's no logic there. Wasn't he supposed to do his job no matter what kinds of feedback he was getting from Trump?
Yeah, and how would you feel if you were wrongly investigated? If somebody made some crap up about you, because that's exactly what happened. Top level people within the FBI, and now that Representative Doug Collins has been kind enough to release some of the closed door testimony from Lisa Page and Bruce Orr and others, we now know that there were discussions among those top level people about the fact that, one, this Russia investigation was an insurance policy. That text message that we've read to you over and over and over again, it means what it says. Lisa Page admits that. The insurance policy was the Russia investigation. Now, what else has come out? Because, they drib and drab this stuff out. They're running out the clock on us, folks. They've been doing this for 2 years. Finally, now, some text messages between Lisa Page and her boss, Andy McCabe, have come out. And in that, they discussed the fact that they knew they were supposed to inform the FISA court that this dossier that they were submitting to get a warrant to spy on President Trump's campaign, that this dossier was cooked up by people working for Hillary Clinton, that it was opposition research. Research is probably the wrong word. It was opposition fiction writing that was done for political purposes. And remember, they buried that in a footnote in the FISA application. I'm sure none of the judges even picked up on it. So we know that they knew that they were supposed to reveal this because their own communications cover that fact, that they knew they were supposed to tell the FISA court about the bias. And we know that they didn't make that clear to the FISA court because the truth is the whole thing was made up. They knew it was made up. It was made up as an insurance policy. They knew that. They really didn't ever think that they were going to use this insurance policy because they never thought that you and me would be stupid enough to elect President Trump, okay? They never thought we would be that stupid. This is what they say in their text messages, folks. We're not making anything up here. This is all essentially direct quotes or paraphrases of direct quotes. So they never thought they were actually going to have to account for any of this bad conduct. They thought that once Madam Hillary Clinton became president, that all this would be swept under the rug. And the truth is, if they had dropped it when Trump became president, I think he was basically looking to sweep things under the rug and not make a long, drawn-out partisan fight. And all that we can hope now, after we've been through this 2-year witch hunt, and there's nothing to show for it, nothing. All we can hope now is that they've made Trump angry enough, President Trump angry enough, that he will want to do something about it. And that's certainly the noise that's being made, as he talked about over the weekend. He said, this was an illegal, and that's what it was. I mean, understand that what they wanted to do was unseat a sitting president because they thought that he was unworthy of being president and that you folks who voted for him were stupid for voting for him. And because you're too stupid to know what's good for you, they were going to come in and pull a little trick. It was going to be a little Russia trick. And they were going to first, they thought, make sure he never gets elected. Because we'll spy on him and then we'll find some dirt while we're spying on him. And then we'll leak that and he'll never get elected. Problem is they didn't find that dirt, so they didn't have anything to leak on him. And he got elected. Well, and then they thought, well, now that he's been elected, we'll stymie his administration, and we'll just keep looking. And remember how they talked about Bob Mueller's His mandate is completely unlimited. He can look into anything. He can look into the Trump organization. He can look into Trump's finances. He can look into President Trump's baby pictures and whoever photographed those pictures. He can go that far back. We were told that Bob Mueller can do whatever he wants to do. And he has a very broad mandate. Now, listening to CNN yesterday, I learned that actually Bob Mueller had a very narrow mandate. And his report really wasn't expected to tell us much of anything. We never thought we were going to get anything from his report. We always knew that Bob Mueller was only looking into an extremely narrow issue of Russian conspiracy, certainly much narrower than what the Congress is looking into. And we never thought we were going to get anything out of that. I mean, this is what people on the panels were actually saying yesterday.
Explain why it's illegal to release the whole report. They were talking about that on Charlie's show with the sardine.
Illegal is probably the wrong word.
Okay.
There is a special counsel regulation. Just in general, remember the whole James Comey thing where he came out and he said, I'm not going to indict Hillary Clinton, but I'm going to tell you what I think of what she's done anyway. Remember that whole shebang? Mm-hmm. And a lot of commentators said, number one, that violates DOJ policy. And that's what the Inspector General said. You can't do that. When you're not going to charge somebody with a crime, it's not the time to go through all of the tips that you received, true, untrue, whatever. It's not the time to go through and pick through all the mud that you raked up over the last couple of years in the investigation. Because if you got something to charge them with, then charge them. If you're not going to charge them, you're just slandering them. You're just making a bunch of supposition. You're just giving people a bunch of fodder to think that maybe a crime occurred, kind of like what they were doing on CNN yesterday, where they're trying to say, well, clearly something must have happened here. And that's why that's why they want the whole Mueller report, because they want to pick and choose and they want to re-argue and they want to say, well, look what this witness statement says, or look what that piece of evidence says. And they want to say Bob Mueller didn't consider the evidence properly. He didn't weigh it correctly. They want to re-weigh it. They want to redo his decision. But you don't get to do that, okay? Number one, you don't know everything he knows. But more importantly, this was the process that was set up. His decision is final. You don't get to get an unfavorable decision from him and say, well, obviously he didn't get it right, so now we're going to just redo this whole investigation.
Well, there's a bunch of Democrats that say they can't wait to get their hands on the report and read the whole thing. Will that ever happen?
Well, I'm not sure. I think they probably will eventually get the whole report. I don't think it matters. I don't think William Barr would for 1 second write up a summary that doesn't accurately summarize the report, because he knows other people are going to see that, and he knows he'd be subject to criticism if he made stuff up.
You said it earlier, but how much has this cost taxpayers?
It's like $38 million. Mm-hmm. I mean, give me a break.
Can you imagine what we could do with $38 million? I mean,
yeah.
But to the government, that's probably
nothing.
not that
Who cares?
much. That's nothing. Mm-hmm.
Well, to them, it's nothing because they don't ever have to reach into their pockets and fund anything. They'll reach into our pockets. This is all paid for by us, and it was all a farce. I mean, there's no conspiracy, period. That's a complete exoneration. If there's no conspiracy, there's no obstruction of justice. I mean, the obstruction of justice idea, the charge, whatever you want to call it, the suggestion that the president obstructed justice had so many problems with it. I mean, just a couple here, just to remind you. Don't you know that James Comey presided over the FBI when they allowed 3 independent contractors complete unsupervised access to the FISA database, meaning that they could run searches without warrants in violation of the 4th Amendment to the United States Constitution on U.S. citizens? And they apparently did that on like 5,000 of us. You know, who only knows who was included in that? You think it might have included Sean Hannity? You think it might have included Rush Limbaugh? You think it might have included Mark Levin? You think it might have included some of their political enemies? You know it did. You know that's exactly what they were doing. You going to say something?
No, I just saw this headline that Pat just showed us. Former Clinton advisor says Democrats risk backlash if they don't accept Mueller findings and move on.
I think they really do, because they've been telling the American
people.
That? They've been telling the American people over and over and over again how honorable Bob Mueller is, how they would accept what Bob Mueller had to say, and now Bob Mueller said it, and it's time to accept it and move on.
That's a former Clinton advisor that said that.
The only thing I think is it's time to move on now to looking at prosecuting the people who cooked up this coup. Andrew McCabe, James Comey, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Bruce Orr. These people, Glenn Simpson, these people need to be prosecuted. These people need to be looked into. We need a special counsel to look into them. Stick with us. We'll go out there when we come back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Now's about the time that we go out there, but we're just going to go out there with more nuances to the Robert Mueller report. And now that we've seen that President Trump has been exonerated, there was no collusion, what happens next?
Well, don't you think that this deserves the Out There segment after 2 years of this witch hunt? I mean, can it be much more out there that, as Peter Strzok said he was worried about from the get-go, there's no there. There's no there. Not a little bit of there. Not a moderate amount of there. No nothing. There. There's nothing. We got nothing out of this. There's no evidence. In fact, the report, as summarized by Attorney General Barr, went so far as to say that there were efforts by the Russians to reach out to the Trump campaign, and that the campaign didn't accept the offers of help. They didn't respond to them. So, I mean, there is no there. And it is absolutely amazing to me. And folks, what I hope you'll do is I hope you'll go back, particularly if you're one of those people who believes this whole, witch hunt, the basis for the witch hunt, believes what we've been being told by all the mainstream media outlets for the last 2 years. Because really, my question to you, is it possible? I mean, this might be one of the most out there things ever, the idea that they all got it so wrong for so long. They all got it so wrong for so long. There was nothing there, as we now know. The conclusion is there was nothing there. But we've been being told for 2 years by what are apparently respected news institutions, the likes of Slate Magazine, Politico, dare I mention CNN, MSNBC. I mean, Rachel Madcow every night has been on talking about everything that we were going to learn about the horrible Russian conspiracy, and she had all these details that she'd cooked up and made up in her own mind, none of which have turned out to be true. There are no sealed indictments building up anywhere. There's nothing left. And you might say, well, we have not heard about that. Well, read the letter. I mean, it's only 4 pages. Read William Barr's letter. He specifically says in there's no sealed indictments. That's it. This is over with. There are no more indictments. Well, yeah, but Mueller indicted a bunch of people. Yeah, he indicted them just about all for stuff that didn't have anything to do with Russian conspiracy or collusion, right? Not a one of them was indicted for Russian conspiracy, except for the people who weren't going to show up because they're Russian nationals and they're not coming to the U.S. for some trial. What, so we can convict them in basically a kangaroo court or something? I mean, they're not stupid. They're not going to come over here for that. Just like we wouldn't go to Russia if somebody charged you in Russia with Pat George for running a troll farm. You wouldn't go to Russia.
No, absolutely not.
So they're not coming here.
For any reason.
So when they indict those guys, they know they're never going to show up, and that's what's called in the law a default. And that's what they're expecting. They want to win by default. And that's why they did it. And remember, when those folks, some of them actually did get a lawyer and showed up and said, hey, we're ready for trial. And the special counsel's office had to say, oh, we're not ready for trial. Because they didn't actually think people were going to show up and defend themselves in court. But it's so unbelievable to me that the mainstream media and like 201, every single outlet, I don't think anybody was telling you the truth, folks. They all had, remember all these stories from experts say and sources well placed in the investigation suggest indictments may be coming soon for Trump, members of the Trump organization, his family. Remember all this stuff? I mean, if you don't remember it and you're on Twitter, go find me on Twitter. I'm at Mo Streetman. And you can look at all of the tweets because I spent a couple of hours yesterday. I just typed in the search box, indict Trump. And I just started scrolling back through. And the ones where people were saying This is what I've heard from confidential sources, or I can now confirm that there are sealed indictments of President Trump and his family just waiting for the Mueller, blah, 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 blah. And I would actually take those and retweet them and then ask the people questions. Now, what do they commonly do? Yeah, I know. I actually got one of them responded to me.
Oh, yeah. Good.
One of them took me at face value and responded. Almost everybody else just blocked me and either deleted their tweets. I think they deleted their tweets.
And so you're talking about people in the media, generally.
I'm talking about both media people and just normal people on Twitter. I was kind of I was equal opportunity last night when I was willing to offend people. Congress people, everybody. Anybody that I could find who was saying, I have some secret knowledge or this is what's about to happen. And, of course, these statements go back. It was funny to me because I realized they were talking about this in like February of 2017, like within 10 days of the man being inaugurated president. They were already talking about him being indicted for something or another. And it's funny because you can actually see how they tried a few different things before they finally hit on something that would stick, which is this, he did something wrong by getting rid of James Comey, and that probably had to do with him trying to cover up the fact that he was a Russian agent. I mean, we've actually had, I believe it was Malcolm Nance. It may have been somebody else. Malcolm Nance has said enough, though, that I feel confident in just calling him out on it because of many of the things that he said over the past 2 years. But we had people like Malcolm Nance, these bellicose commentators that MSNBC would have on who would just say pretty much whatever they could make up, whatever they could pull out of that place where the sun don't
bellicose,
shine.
Aggressive.
Yeah.
I know what that means.
SAT test later. These folks, they would just get on there and they would say things like Trump is a Russian agent or Trump is, best friends with Vladimir Putin. None of this turned out to be true. And my question is, when do we stop believing them? When do we just put this now? We need to remember this, folks, because this ain't the first time this has happened. This is not the first time we've been lied to, but this is one of the times where they've lied and they tried to overwhelm the truth by more lies. So remember that old phrase, a lie told often enough becomes the truth? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of an old maxim of propaganda, right? They say it came from Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi. But if you just keep repeating something enough, even if it's false, people will eventually believe it. And that's what's happened here because we've had 2 years of a constant repetition of falsehoods that President Donald Trump had done some kind of a conspiracy or collusion with Russia to affect our elections and undermine our democracy. We've heard that for 2 years. Heck, the Washington Post even changed its slogan, right? Changed its slogan and said, democracy dies in darkness. I mean, see, that's how serious what we've been dealing with is, folks. This was an attack on our very institutions, on our democracy, on what it means to be an American. No, that was all lies. That was all false. And you know what's really disgusting? Is that unless they're idiots, and a lot of them are idiots in the media, but not all of them. Some of them were smart enough to know what they were doing. They were smart enough to know that they hadn't looked into anything. They were smart enough to know that they didn't have evidence of anything. They didn't have anything, but they told you the lies anyway, and they knew what they were doing. And folks, I'll tell you what, I'll never trust the media again, and I hope that you won't either. And we need to remember this for the future. We need to remember how they lied to us over and over and over again. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And don't forget to exercise your brain at least once a week.